Agitorium nostrum in nomine Domini. This is the history. We're looking at a new saint now, Saint Justin, the philosopher. Saint Justin is also sometimes called the apologist, because he wrote a defense of the faith. Saint Justin, and he was martyred. So we know a lot about the early Catholic Mass through Saint Justin. So we left off saying somewhere in that drowsy, luxurious city, okay, try to move quietly, please. Somewhere in the drowsy, luxurious city, there was a prosperous villa owned by one man named Priscus. Priscus, Priscus. So he's the father of Justin, of Saint Justin. Who, with his father Bacchius, had been sent there with other Greek colonists by Titus, about the time of the destruction of Jerusalem, which would be about what year? Precisely what year?
70 AD.
70, yes. Priscus had a son named Justin, who was born about the year 100. He must have been about 7 years old, therefore, when St. Ignatius of Antioch was cast to the lions. So much we gather from St. Justin's own writings, which furnish a fairly complete portrait of him, with certain tantalizing omissions. His family were pagans, the name suggesting a Latin origin. They were not Jewish, anyhow, for Justin tells us he could not speak Hebrew. His father, like other well-to-do citizens of the empire, gave him the best possible education, not in the public schools, but under private tutors, the sort of education that the Emperor Antoninus Pius gave his adopted son, Marcus Aurelius. So they homeschooled him, but paid for good teachers to come and teach him. And the boy excelled in rhetoric and in the study of poetry and philosophy. We do not know whether he ever sat on the well stone where the Son of God had rested one summer day, or whether he ever tasted the cool water of that holy place. But we do know from his own story that he acquired a passionate desire for truth, not merely the accumulation of facts, which is called knowledge, or data, but a curiosity to know the ultimate secret at the heart of things, the absolute certainty beyond which there could be no further questions. So, philosophia means the love of wisdom. He has the love of wisdom, which is a gift of God. He probably traveled much as a youth, though he is rather vague on that subject, and he undoubtedly read a large number of the plentiful and cheap books which, copied out in large editions on papyrus by hundreds of slaves, were scattered throughout the teeming cities of the empire. For a time he lived at Alexandria, which is where?
Alexandria was in Greece.
No,
Egypt.
Northern Egypt, yes. It must have been an education of a sort to live in that rich cosmopolitan community of 1 million souls, where three worlds met in a babel of tongues and a fever of commercial and intellectual activity at the very gateway to the east and to the west. Money is their god, said the Emperor Adrian of the Alexandrians. Even the street urchins seemed to have plenty of it, and almost anything could be bought in the cool bazaars: linens, wools, glass, paper, essences, perfumes, women, everything, said a wag, but snow. Anything could be bought but snow. So these are northern Egypt, so it's probably very hot at times. St. Justin, walking among the vast halls, the incredible libraries, and the hospitals, where famous physicians treated consumptives and invalids from Italy and Spain, soon discovered that there was one more thing that money could not buy, and that was one.
I guess true joy.
All right. What do you say, Anthony? The one thing St. Justin was seeking that money could not buy.
Truth.
Truth. Truth itself. Did Pontius Pilate seek truth?
No.
What did he say?
What is truth?
Yeah, what's truth? Everyone has their own opinions. Yet truth was the one thing he wanted more than anything else. And that's the grace of God. He must have been a very pure soul, a very good-hearted boy, because he didn't fall for the traps. He wanted truth. For a while he sought this rare and precious jewel in the discourses of a Stoic philosopher. Undoubtedly he must have read then the fragmentary teaching of the crippled slave Epictetus, who had given a didactic and almost theological bent to the most plausible of Greek ethical systems after its translation to Rome. Epictetus. E.P. Epictetus, Epictetus. In Epictetus he found an embryo most of the thought to be written down more systematically in a few years by Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, that God, or the gods, made all things, and that all were good, that happiness for man consisted in living according to the laws of nature, which included the laws of his own being, that evil did not exist for the Stoic, who by training his will had become completely indifferent to the vicissitudes of pleasure and pain, and that a man must find happiness within himself. If any be unhappy, said Epictetus, let him remember that he is unhappy by reason of himself alone. For God has made all men to enjoy felicity and constancy of good. To a good man there is no evil, either in life or death. A man should be prepared to be sufficient to himself, to dwell with himself alone, even as God dwells with himself alone, shares his repose with none, and considers the nature of his own administration, intent upon such thoughts as are suitable to himself. So these are some of the Stoic ideas that St. Justin came to know. A lot of them are good, but not all of them. St. Justin found a brief consolation in this attempt to explain God and man by reason alone. He may have felt that at least it went as far as reason could go, but it left too many things unexplained. The hazy concept of the deity, the evasion of the problem of evil failed to satisfy his thirst for a truth which reason could not demolish. It must have become evident also to one so observant that Stoicism tended to produce smug, self-satisfied prigs and moralists instead of serene, well-balanced philosophers. About this time he heard of a teacher of philosophy who was creating quite a stir among the idle dilettanti of Alexandria. He was a peripatetic, probably an Aristotelian, who rejected Plato's method of descending from general ideas to concrete particulars, and sought instead to arrive at the universals by the study of phenomena, in short, what we call inductive logic. So this is Plato. Plato believed in the real ideas were up in the air somewhere. So the essence of a horse is not really what you see in a horse, but the essence was somewhere up in the sky somewhere. So Aristotle was more down to earth. And he said, no, the horse has an essence of a horse. The universal idea of a horse is in the mind, but this particular horse is still the substance and being of a horse. And we'll study that in the history of philosophy, which will certainly be next year. An introduction to philosophy. This at least was a more scientific approach. Unfortunately, the new magister, what's magister, magistry, masculine?
Master or Lord.
What?
Master or Lord.
Dominus is Lord.
Teacher.
Teacher or magister, yeah. Teacher or master, yeah. So unfortunately, the new magister, the teacher, displayed at the outset a more avid interest in the fees he was to receive than in the truths he was to impart. For after a few days he asked for cash in advance, in order that our communications may not be unprofitable, he said. And so he was more interested in making money off what he was teaching. How could a man so mercenary, St. Justin asked himself, have a truly philosophical mind? The answer was obvious. On leaving the peripatetic, he had some notion of looking into the doctrines of Pythagoras. Pythagoras, he's another philosopher. Pythagoras, for which there was still a considerable vogue. 600 years had passed since the sage of Samos had taught the old absurdity of the transmigration of souls, and the infallible power of mathematics as the key to all philosophical knowledge. Yet many pagans still found some attraction in this theory, or that of his disciples, that life was dominated by numbers. The odd ones connotated light, straightness, goodness, the right hand, masculinity. The even numbers connotated darkness, crookedness, evil, the left, femininity. And by the harmony of the spheres. Okay, so St. Augustine would have been exposed to this, but he, being Catholic, when he converted, he used the numbers and interpreted them in the Catholic way. So he didn't just put magic in numbers. So for him, numbers had a deep meaning. 10 is the 10 Commandments, the fulfilling of the law of God. 40 was the number of, we saw, penance and fasting and conversion, yes. 3 is the number of
the Trinity, the theological virtues.
Yeah, God, yes. And 4, the elements of this earth, also the 4 virtues, right? So Saint Augustine goes into numbers. But these guys were saying numbers dictate your whole life. And everything can be solved by just math and numbers. Later, Christian minds have been attracted by some of the ideas of the Pythagoreans. St. Augustine, who tells us that 8 is the number of the body, 7 of the soul. St. Thomas Aquinas also, and of course Shakespeare with his, "There's not the smallest orb which thou beholdest, but in his motion like an angel sings, still acquiring to the young-eyed cherubins, such harmony is in immortal souls." That's quoting Shakespeare. St. Justin enrolled himself in the Pythagorean school. At the very outset, however, he discovered what seemed an insurmountable barrier. He lacked the required preliminary knowledge of music, geometry, and astronomy, which was essential. He resigned and gave up all hope of being a Pythagorean. So, like St. Augustine is searching, and he's searching, and he's searching. He's looking for truth. And no doubt in all this time, he's speaking to God, the true God. Lord, show me the way, show me the truth, the true answers. There's got to be a better answer than these weirdos. About this time, too, he seems to have moved to Ephesus, that incredibly old pagan city, which the Amazons were said to have founded on the west coast of Asia Minor. It was rich, commercial, a center of learning next only to Alexandria. It was chiefly famous for its vast temple of Artemis or Diana on the banks of the Selinus River. When St. Paul went there to preach at Ephesus, her cult had become so fanatical and so profitable to those who made little images of her for sale that he was mobbed by devotees and silversmiths. In St. Justin's time, her temple still raised its Ionic mass, one of the 7 wonders of the world, above the shady walls of beautiful formal parks and gardens. Her priests conducted within her forest of marble pillars a veritable bank where many kings of the East kept their treasures. Her mighty statue, ugly and stiff as a stone mummy, the bosom grotesquely covered with many breasts, gazed blankly down on the city, whose chief boast was to be her Neocorus. Neocorus, what's that? That's a Greek word. Neocorus. Neo is let's see what this means. In English, Neocorus translates to temple keeper or temple guardian. Originally, it referred to a person who swept and cleaned the temple or a sacristan with charge over a temple. So there it is, Neocorus, temple keeper, I guess. Soon after making his residence there, how, why, and when he left untold, St. Justin enrolled himself as the pupil of an eminent Platonist. Like so many sensitive minds throughout the centuries, from Philo and St. Augustine to Shelley, he was fascinated for a time by the luminous words of the prose poet, who was capable of mingling sublime and arresting conceptions with such base fallacies as the common possession of wives and slavery. Plato, more than any other thinker, seemed to address himself to a deep craving in the human heart for a perfection it was obviously made for, yet could never attain unaided in this changing world. Yet Plato was only a philosopher after all. The best of philosophers, St. Justin had found, cast only a little light, often self-contradictory and disturbing, on the destiny of man. None of them gave him power to rise above it. How could they, when even those who wrote most earnestly about the need of self-control were unable to cast off the tyranny of their own flesh? The passions of Diogenes followed him into his tub. Anaxagoras had fingers that could not resist the itch to close upon the property of others. So he's listing here a number of famous philosophers. Diogenes, Anaxagoras, Lycurgus and Cato cast the broken wreckage of their lives, suicides both, back into the face of their Creator. Cicero could not rise above petty revenge and vainglory. The wise Socrates, if we may believe his own great disciple, was at one time addicted to the unnatural vice so prevalent in Athens and the whole pagan world. Yes, and even the Olympian Plato had clay feet. He was capable of flattering Dionysius just as Aristotle flattered Alexander. Nor was there anything permanently satisfying in the teachings of a man whose book, called The Republic, was a serene tyranny based upon the anguish of slaves. So Plato, although he had many truths in his Republic, he didn't have the full truth, and St. Justin knew it. He could see through the holes. And he could see through all these philosophers, pagan philosophers. They had a lot of truth to say, but their lives didn't show it. And especially the ones who committed suicide. Why was it that even the best and the most profound searchings of the human intellect left the mystery of our life comparatively unsolved and man as much as ever a victim to forces within and without. It was about the time he was making this discovery at Ephesus that St. Justin first came into contact with a force of whose existence he may have known vaguely, but whose mysterious and paradoxical nature he little suspected. The gospel of Christ had been preached there very early in the history of the church by some Jewish disciples of John the Baptizer. One of them, apparently, the Alexandrian Jew Apollo. Aquila and Priscilla and St. Paul organized them as a church. So Apollo is mentioned by St. Paul, right? Apollo watered. How did it go again? Apollo planted, Paul watered, and God gave the increase. And then the others in this church, he mentions Aquila and Priscilla, Saint Aquila and Priscilla. St. Paul would organize them into the nucleus of the early church in Ephesus. St. John, the great St. John, who stood at the foot of the cross, who took care of the most blessed Virgin Mary. St. John who accused them in the Apocalypse of having lost their first charity, when he writes to the church of Ephesus. He spent his last years among them as their bishop, according to early tradition, and he had died there only 25 to 30 years before the arrival of St. Justin. So St. John died around Ephesus about 30 years before St. Justin came there. So very important details here that show the Gospels were fresh and the eyewitnesses of Christ were just fresh in the memory. Undoubtedly, there were men and women in the city who had known the beloved apostle well and could have told many interesting things about him to the young Samaritan in the philosopher's cloak, who walked every day along the sea or the riverbank, questioning the riddle of life, while the lions of Diana gazed mockingly down at him from the carved honeysuckle vines on the facade of her temple. St. Justin's first information about the Christians was not likely to attract him to a study of their belief. He heard that they were inhuman monsters, degenerates and atheists, enemies of public order, and worshipped the head of an ass, ate the flesh of babies, and refused to burn incense before the emperor's statue. So if that's the report he gets of the first Catholic people, that's not too convincing, is it? Yeah.
Was he a bishop?
Apollo, I don't remember if he's a bishop. Probably a priest, though.
Do we know if he was martyred ever?
And the martyrology has a lot of these names from the early church. That would be a very good study, is to take the martyrology and take all the saints that knew the apostles or were consecrated bishops, like by St. Peter or by St. Paul, right? We just hit one yesterday or the day before. I think it was Beninius, consecrated a bishop by St. Peter, was sent to Gaul or something. I think it'd be a great study to do that with the martyrology. Collect all those saints that knew the apostles and were consecrated, bishops, ordained priests, received as consecrated virgins, as nuns, because that's a gap that the Protestants they ignore that gap. But it's very important because it shows the continuity of the Catholic teaching, the continuity of ordinations, consecrations of bishops, right? Aquila and Priscilla and St. Paul organized them as a church. St. John, undoubtedly there were men and women in the city who had known the beloved apostle. St. Justin's first information about the Christians was not very attractive. No wonder they were put to death by the authorities, these early Catholics, if this is the report he knew about them. Then, from time to time, he began to hear strange accounts of how they behaved when Catholics were about to die. Now and then news came from Rome about the liquidation of the various leaders of that sect. All were executed, one after another. Saint Clement, Saint Evaristus, Saint Alexander, Saint Sixtus, Saint Telephorus, Saint Hyginus, Saint Pius, Saint Anicetus. A long and noble procession of the bishops of Rome, most of them Jews probably, had gone serenely to the most horrible tortures and bloody deaths. Perhaps St. Justin had heard also of the two brothers, St. Faustinus and Jovita, of Hermes, St. Sabina and St. Getulius, and of many others who perished in the first three great persecutions. He began to admire the heroic fortitude and courage with which these Christians could face so terrible a fate. And this, he tells us, convinced him that they could not be the depraved persons they were said to be. Seeing them dauntless in the face of death, and of all that men fear, I said to myself that it was impossible that they should be living in evil and in the love of pleasures. That St. Justin, in his work Apologia to Pro Christianis, in defense of Christianity, chapter 12, and it's found in the Migne collection, Migne Patrology. Remember I mentioned that before. Migne Patrology, which is all the works of the fathers contained in there. Very precious work. Father Cyprian has a full set in the monastery, and the seminary in Virginia has a full set. They're about $10,000 for a whole set. One day he had walked farther than usual and had come to a secluded place where nothing could be seen but long stretches of white sand and the sparkling blue of the Aegean Sea mingling with the deeper blue of the sky, when he became aware that someone was walking behind him. Turning quickly, he saw an old man of venerable presence, who looked kindly upon him. "Do you know me?" asked the stranger. "No," said St. Justin. "Then why do you look so fixedly upon me?" "I am surprised to meet any human being in this remote and lonely spot," he said. "Some of my friends have gone on a journey," said the old man, "and I have come here to look after them." This odd introduction led to a discussion of philosophy in which both agreed that the end or purpose of all learning and the key to all happiness must be the knowledge of
God.
Yes. St. Justin remarked that this could be best accomplished through the philosophy of Plato. "Not at all," replied the old man, "for Plato and Pythagoras had only a confused and partial understanding of God and of the soul. How then could they communicate light to others?" So that's true. The philosophers, Plato and Socrates and all these ones listed, Heraclius and all of them, they're all grasping for the truth. They're all grasping for the full truth, and they get glimpses of it. They get some rays of that light, but they don't get the whole grasp of it. Yet these are noble men, most of them, noble hearts, and they want the truth, but they're just not getting it, the full picture. And St. Justin is one of these. "Not at all, Plato. He's not. Plato and Pythagoras had only a confused and partial understanding of God and of the soul. How, then, could they communicate light to others?" St. Justin had to admit the force of this question, for he himself had begun to see the limitations of the philosophers. But if they were wrong, he demanded, who then could set him straight? "The prophets," said the old man. Long before Plato and Socrates, these men had written books inspired by God and foretelling many events which since then had come to pass. These books were still extant and teaching with authority and not by disputation. They contained the only true account of the beginning of all things, and of the one true God, and of his Son, Jesus Christ, whom he had sent into the world to teach all men. Pray that the gates of life may be opened to thee, he concluded, for these things are not to be discerned unless God and his Christ grant to a man the knowledge of them. So this was described by St. Justin in his dialogue with Trypho, chapter 3. Dialogue with Trypho, he describes this. So dialogue is a famous work of St. Justin. With Trypho, or Trypho. Trypho was a Jew. And so St. Justin is talking with him and leads him through the scriptures, through sound philosophy, to see that the true fulfillment of the Jewish religion is Jesus Christ and his Catholic Church. His church fulfills all the prefigurings of the sacrifice of the Lamb, the structure of the temple with the sanctuary, Holy of Holies, all the sprinkling of the blood, everything. St. Justin will take Trypho through all this to convince him the Jewish religion is done, it's finished, it's fulfilled, and it's found in the Catholic Church, and that the Messiah has truly come. It's a great work. We should actually do a study on it. I have the complete works of the Fathers in English. It's not as good as mean patrology. I have the whole set, but it's in the monastery at Silver City. So I don't know if Father Cyprian would give it up. But anyway. With this, the old man departed, and St. Justin never saw him again. There has been much speculation as to who he was. Did St. Justin invent him to give an allegorical explanation of the change of his views? Did he have a vision? Did he speak with an angel, as Tobias and St. Peter did? Or with Peter himself? Or St. Joseph? Or did he encounter in the flesh some old Jewish Christian well versed in the scriptures and zealous to make converts? Whatever the truth may be, it is certain that St. Justin soon sought out some Christians in the city. He inquired into their beliefs. He became convinced of their truth and was baptized, probably about the year 130 AD. So St. Justin baptized 130 AD. Maybe it was St. John. Who knows? So he was finally baptized. So here begins his real journey towards heaven. And he's going to die a martyr. The old man, he tells us, had kindled a flame of truth in him. Besides, he says, the words of Christ had in themselves a terrible power. Isn't that something? The words of Christ have a tremendous power. And that's true. That's true. He who has left lands, father, mother, sister, brothers, for my sake, shall receive 100-fold in this life and in the next, in eternal life in the next. Those are powerful words. Those words have made saints who are now in heaven. Those words have filled convents and monasteries and seminaries. Those words have filled heaven. Powerful. St. Justin had finally discovered not only the truth, but a vocation. Like all who learn to know and love Christ, he wanted to tell the good news to everybody in the world. Apparently, he spent most of the remainder of his life wandering from city to city, still wearing the pallium of a teacher of philosophy, to show everyone that he had discovered the truth, and discoursing to all who would listen. Footnote. For a detailed discussion of his life and various questions said about it, see the Prefatis by D.P. Maran, OSB at Benedictine, in the Mean collection. There is a very brief summary in the Newman translation of Ante-Nicene Fathers. That's the one I have. Volume 1. Butler gives him 14 good pages under June 1st. The latest 1956 Water and Thurston edition is scanty 3 pages. It is our duty to make known our doctrine, said St. Justin, lest we incur the guilt and the punishment of those who have sinned through ignorance. Had not Christ said, "Go and teach all nations"? He wrote a great deal also, but of the many works attributed to him, only 3 are of the undisputed authenticity. They are the Dialogue with Trypho the Jew. Trypho the Jew, that's the title of it. So that's one. The second work from St. Justin is Apologias pro Christianis. Defense of the Christians, or defense of the faith for Christians, defending his new brethren in the faith. And that's Apologias, volume 1 and 2. So those are his works. So he was the first to write apologetics. And apologetics doesn't mean apology for the Catholic faith. It means defense. Apologia means defense of the faith.
You're saying these ones, their authenticity aren't questioned.
Right.
Right.
That's what William Thomas Walsh says. Undisputed. It'd be worth studying that, wouldn't it? Be really interesting, because he's coming right off the cuff of paganism into the fresh Catholic faith being preached. The first of these books, addressed to his friend Marcus Pompeius. Marcus Pompeius is an account of the 2 days of disputation with a learned Jew who happened to be walking one morning with several companions on the walks of Sixtus. The walks of Sixtus, whatever that is. Saw St. Justin's philosopher's pallium and engaged him in a conversation. So it looks like William Thomas Walsh is going to draw from this source right here. So he's writing to his friend Marcus Pompeius. Good Roman names. "Hail, philosopher," he said. "Salve," replied Justin. Salve means what? In Latin?
Hail.
Hail or hi. Hello. "What is there of great importance?" The stranger said that Corinthus, the Socratic at Argos, had told him to greet anyone dressed as St. Justin was, as a philosopher, and to help him, and he introduced himself as Trypho, a Hebrew of the circumcision, who had escaped from the recent war in Palestine. He referred, of course, to the second great Jewish rebellion against the tyranny of the Roman Empire. The first had occurred under Trajan, shortly after the death of St. Ignatius of Antioch, and was one of the bloodiest episodes in history. The Jews overran Cyrenaica, killing 200,000 Romans and Greeks. So Cyrenaica, C-Y-R-E-N A-I-C-A. Cyrenaica. So the Jews came there and killed 200,000 Romans. The Cyprian Jews slew 240,000. In some cities, they enjoyed the huge poetic justice of making captive Romans and Greeks fight each other in the arenas. That's strange. So, okay, we're going to pick up next time with this conversation of St. Justin and the Jew, Trypho. Agitorium nostrum in nomine Domini.
We've had each other.